The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com weekly sale. Head over to StarCityGames.com/sale because now until August 9th at 10:59 a.m., select Magic the Gathering supplies are 25% off. 25? Normally it's 10. Is this right? Yep. 25% off select Magic the Gathering supplies. Sleeves, deck boxes, binders, playmats. Just get a bunch of them. You got stuff you need to sleeve up. You got cubes, commander decks, 25% off. That is an absolute ton. Protect what you collect now until August 9th at 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time. Select Magic the Gathering supplies, 25% off. That is a massive, massive amount. I'm going to quit doing this promo and go grab some for myself. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 540, to an episode that all of us have been waiting for very, very patiently, or impatiently if you're me. I am Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter. And my co-host, who, from the sounds of it, can hardly contain his excitement even beyond mine.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Overturf, and I am known for the excitement that I radiate. In fact, I thought that this was the episode we were doing last week. That's
how excited you were.
8 days of prep.
Yeah, I mean, this is, in all seriousness, this is an episode I've been looking forward to doing for quite a while. Well, 2 episodes, I suppose. But as we mentioned last week, when we had been discussing drafting, and kind of some of our philosophies on how to navigate a draft, something that we discussed briefly that we mentioned we would come back to is lands. And today and tomorrow, well, next week, not tomorrow, but tomorrow sounds better. Today and tomorrow will be all about lands. The theoretical tomorrow, maybe not the exact tomorrow.
Yeah, the point in time in the future. Another episode, anyway. And yeah, lands is a great topic. And usually you get asked really surface level questions like, hey, my cube is 540 cards. How many lands do I need? And the answer is much longer than a person phrasing that question wants it to be. I do have an article out somewhere in my backlog on SCG that covered lands and cube, and today we'll be going over with even more nuance on the podcast. There's a lot of good points to go over regarding lands.
Oh my gosh, yes, totally. I have also, I believe, back in my cube writing days, have also written an article exclusively about lands, and have, that is something that is, I don't want to say maybe the most excited thing that I like to talk about cube, but it's it's something that I feel very, very passionately about. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how much our, theories align when it comes to lands, both from a design perspective and a player perspective.
Yeah, and there's a ton of places where people could branch off. There's a really popular notion that when it comes to running cubes and drafting cubes that I kind of disagree with as a cube designer. We'll get into that. I'm sure it's going to come up.
I have no doubt that it will. So, okay, for this week, today's episode, this is going to be discussing lands more from, like we said, a design perspective. So this is coming from us as cube designers and creators and curators, and how we feel about how that, card type impacts how we work within making a cube. And next week is going to be focused on the playing of lands and how you're interacting with those as a player, whether you are drafting one of the cubes that Ryan or I have made, or a digital offering, or one of your friends' cubes at your local game store. Basically, you as a player interacting with it and how you should view lands and interact with those in a draft or just limited in general setting.
Yeah, and these two topics, they are really intertwined. There's things that we're going to say today when we talk about various land cycles and why you would include or exclude them in a cube that translate directly into the play experience. So that's going to be meaningful for you as a drafter. If we say a certain land cycle facilitates deck X, Y, or Z, or playing X number of colors in a cube. And then next week, when we're talking about as a drafter, what we're thinking about, that's going to impact how we approach, or how you might think about approaching designing a cube, where you say, oh, well, players see that and think this, so now I want to design this way. So it's going to be a good 2-week stretch to listen to if you're interested in both sides of the table.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that you're going to get something, whether you are on one side or the other, where you are someone that just loves to curate cubes. That next week is going to have a lot for you, because it's going to give you a lot to think about. And for this week, if you're just a player and you don't have the cube yourself, and I know a lot of you are out there that are listeners that just are cube drafters and don't have your own cube, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about might inform how you think about that as well, because it certainly does for when we're going to get to next week, and vice versa. So yeah, I'm very excited to dig in. Yeah,
tons to go over. Where do we start, Justin?
Well, I want to give a pause before we start, because I have an update for everyone.
Ooh, do you want a drum roll?
No, I don't want a drum roll. I feel like that might overdo it.
Yeah, I also didn't want to give you one, so that's perfect.
Okay. Well, now I kind of want one. All right. So a lot of people, since we've started this podcast, this is episode number 23. So since this is almost half a year for doing this. Man,
where does the time go?
Where does the time go? What is time even? Anyway, so ever since we started this podcast, the question I've been asked the most is, Parnell, where is your cube? Like living on the internet, because people want to look at my cube list. So the reason that it has not been available is because I was in the process of redesigning it from the ground up. Not just like tweaking it. I had not given it a full redesign since the last SCG Con. So two years ago, 2019, because I kind of focused on doing the SCG Con cube and the Players Cube. I actually designed 2 cubes for that event. So because of that, I had put my personal cube on the back burner, because that took a lot of effort, and really all of my extra cube related time went into that. And then COVID happened, didn't get a chance to cube, and ultimately did not update it through that. So it has been almost 2 years since I have last updated my cube. So because of that, I decided to just, rather than go through and update it, I wanted to redesign it from the ground up. And that is what I've done. And I'm happy to say that I have completed, as complete as a cube can be, completed the first draft of my first, my cube, we'll call it this cube number 1. And the reason for that is because as I was going through this process, my previous cube was a powered cube, complete with, Lotus, Moxen, Soul Ring, Mana Drain, the whole 9, literally and figuratively. And, as time has gone on, there becomes a large gap in, obviously, cards that I want to play and cards I'm able to play when I'm supporting that environment. So, the cube that I have, and Ryan, would you like to guess the size of the cube?
I was going to ask. I would be kind of surprised if you didn't roll up with a 540 or at least a 450.
It is 540 cards. It's actually technically 550 cards because there's 10 Adventures in the Forgotten Realm cards I'm testing.
Okay.
So I just threw those in there, and then it'll cut back down to 540.
Okay.
So it is going to be a 540 card cube because there's so many Magic cards that I love.
I do like that method if you're already above the minimum size anyway. That's a pretty good curation method. Yeah.
So and that's this is good foreshadowing also. Yeah. So that's actually something that I commonly do is I don't like to cut cards preemptively because when you do that, it is requiring you to choose between children, and one of the children you have no idea what they're about. And you might not even like that child. Okay. There's plenty of children I've met that I don't like. So what this allows you to do is rather than cutting cards, just add the new cards in. And then when you're satisfied with the ones you want to keep, solidify those, get rid of the rest. And then, let's say if you test 10 cards and you're like, I'm going to keep 4 or 5 of these, then you have 5 cuts from your actual cube. And if you're not operating at a 360 number or a number where you're filling out the cube the whole time, it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different topic. Anyway, it's a 540 card non-powered cube because there's when you're working with that player environment, it's difficult to say, well, these cool cards are going to sit alongside, Ancestral Recall and Oko. Well, not even Oko. I'm not going to have Oko in any cube in a pack. So what I've done is I have this 540 card cube, which is essentially a legacy power level cube. And I'm going to be making not just 2 cubes, but 3 cubes. So my next project is going to be creating a 360 card vintage power level cube. That's going to take all of the cards essentially that I am cutting or not including in that 540 card cube to have as my power cube because I still enjoy playing with those. And that's going to be a more kind of refined draft experience because I wanted another cube that I didn't have to update as frequently with new cards. So that's going to be cube number 2. And then cube number 3, perhaps as a nod to my illustrious co-host, I am gonna go down the Tubert way.
Ooh,
and I'm gonna be
creating.
I'm going to be creating a Jund Tubert.
Ooh.
As I have gone and looked at listened to obviously Ryan and read some of his articles, it seems like a lot of the Tuberts have blue, which makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I just want a really grindy, Jund oriented, where you feel like you're just playing Jund mirror matches. Tubert. So I'm going to be making a Jund Tubert as my third project, but that one is a little bit off on the horizon after I finish this 360. Nice. So
yeah, there's a lot you can do with Jund. So I'm curious to see where you land on that. I think 360 is the ideal size for a vintage cube so that you get the full range and also people get the highest probability look at actually getting the busted stuff. Mm. I really... Hey, there's that joke where you open up a pack in Vintage Cube. Hey, I thought this was the powered cube, and it's just the back 180 cards that you fill it out with. They just get too much power level disparity. So I really like keeping a tight 360 for a Vintage Cube. And then your 540 card cube. That's something you're very passionate about. So obviously that's a very good thing for you.
Yeah, as everyone knows, I love 540. It's the only true cube size, which is of course why. We named this podcast 540. And I'm sure at some point I'll be able to sleep at night having a cube that's not 540 cards, but I'll get there. A lot of effort and medication, I'm sure. So that's where I am right now. I'm going to try to get our producers to include the links to my cube, currently Cube. In the future, it will be Cube's home, which is going to be on Cube Tutor. And as those of you that know me, I generally do the primary work on a spreadsheet. So I just have a J Parnell Cube spreadsheet that I'll have that linked as well. So look away at your leisure. Ask me questions as I release this to the public. It is something I will probably talk about on my other podcast, because I don't want to. We're not going to spend a whole time talking about my cube on this podcast. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about. It's not just about me. So if you want to hear about that, I think it's going to be next week on Think Twice, which is my other podcast. So that's all for my personal stuff, Ryan.
Oh, that's very cool. I'm happy anytime anybody builds another Tubert. So that's awesome. Yeah. I again love vintage cube as beginner 60 cards, and I love that you put in the time to redesign a 540. Rebuilding a cube is a ton of work. It's actually often more difficult to undo something than to tweak or start from scratch, because you have so much stuff going on, and just moving stuff one card at a time. There's so much infrastructure where if you say, I'm going to cut this card, I want to do this thing, and then when you're moving stuff around, you realize, oh, well, now this other thing doesn't work quite as well. There was some kind of glue. That was a load-bearing archetype or things of that nature. So that is a really big project. That's very cool.
Yes. So I started doing the update when we started doing this podcast. So I would say roughly 21 weeks ago. And I abandoned the update about a month in, and then decided to just redesign it fully. So
nice.
That's been done for about 2 weeks, but I wanted to make sure I put, have a little time away and then go back and look and make sure things made sense. So yeah, it is, it's a, man, I mean, I love doing it, but it is a haul to do. It is, I mean, cubes to do it right. And I'm putting air quotes around that, because I don't think that, this is the opposite of what I generally tell people on this podcast, but like, I try to hold myself to I don't want to say a higher standard, but like, I'm very picky of what is my own work. And I know that I'm going to be judged thusly. So I want to be fully prepared for that.
Yeah. Kind of a combination of knowing what you like, wanting to do right by your own vision for your design, and also, you want it to hold up to the group of people you bring the cube to. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So, I love enough about me. Something I do have in my cube is lands. And I think that is a constant of every single cube, and something that we're really excited to get to. So we are going to take a mandatory advertising break, and we'll be back in just a minute to get into lands.
Listen up, gamers. I have some huge news. If you haven't heard, the SCG Tour Online is back, and we're giving away cash prizes, tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Qualifier Weekend invitations, MTG Arena Championship invitations, and the big one, Star City Games Invitational invitations. You heard that right. The Invitational is back, and that's going to be at SCG Con. SCG Con is back, taking place Halloween weekend. That's October 29th through the 31st in the Star City. That's Roanoke, Virginia, and you can qualify for the Star City Games Invitational via the SCG Tour Online. Stay tuned for more details on that. Those will be coming soon. And for more information on the SCG Tour Online, head over to scgtouronline.starcitygames.com. Now back to the pod.
Land ho! We've arrived, Ryan.
So happy.
If it lands.
So happy to be here.
So today, like we said, design discussion. of lands in cubes. So the first question that I want to pose, what are lands trying to accomplish in a cube?
Well, this is just a good clarifying point. Typically when you mention lands in cube, we are primarily talking about mana fixing lands. You're going to end up with some number of utility lands. There are some lands that do some other stuff. You can go down all kinds of things that Fetchlands do, for example, and that's not even going into creature lands, blah, blah, blah. But generally, we're talking about lands that tap for more than one color of mana. So lands are trying to make 2 or more color decks accessible. That's typically what the conversation about lands in cube is about.
Yes, I would definitely agree. When I think of lands in cube, even though I do think of cards like Mishra's Factory and Wasteland, I think more of Scalding Tarns and Sacred Foundries and Sunpetal Groves and the like. When I think of lands, things that are exactly what you said, making decks that are playing more than one color accessible in a cube. And that, to me, this is like a very, very, very important facet of cube, because it is the portion that allows the rest of your design, whatever it is. Lands are, I feel like, are always the glue to hold those things together in your cube.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that we went over that on some levels goes without saying, but we've talked about monocolored decks in cube, and the idea of supporting a monocolor cube using all 5 colors. Just mathematically, you're kind of locked out. Just the draft's going to be unsuccessful for some number of your players, just the way that 5 divides into 8. The number is less than 1. So you need to start exploring 2 or more color combinations, and your lands are really what makes those decks consistent, what makes them playable. So you can have all the best laid plans and the coolest archetypes, but it's going to be your volcanic islands and your Dragon Skull summits that allow players to cast for spells that actually allows players to realize your vision and actually play with these archetypes successfully.
Yes, and I will take it one step beyond that. I think that, to me, one of the biggest reasons that lands and mana fixing is critical in cubes is because it allows a discovery of playability within your cube that is outside of something you specifically, as a cube designer, might have designed. There are general archetypes, as we've talked about, that you're going to create as a cube designer. And when you have adequate mana fixing, people are able to kind of weave together these unexpected archetypes or cards to work together that might not naturally occur. And that is almost always off of the back of excellent mana fixing in your cube.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Especially if you have these really strong ideas of 2 color archetypes, and then you sit down to draft and you just start playing as 3 or 4 color decks, and you just did not realize the extent of how powerful a deck could be when they take all the parts you put to work in one way, and you see them just combining the best parts of all the decks together, which is maybe a negative manifestation of your mana being too good, but there's a lot of positive discovery in that space as well, typically in 3 color decks.
Yes, and that is actually a good point of something that we'll come back around to later, because I do think that is important, where because finding just like with everything else in cube design, right, finding a balance is really critical. But I'm pro land more than basically any other card type, just because I think that discovery process, as for your drafters, is really, really important. And that, to me, is what creates a lot of the best cube moments, is when someone at the end of a draft comes up with a deck and then shows the owner of the cube a deck, and the owner of the cube is like, wow, I've never seen this deck. And I think that's just an incredible experience. And most of the time, it's not because they played 14 basic lands in their deck. It's going to be like 11 non-basics, and they have like 5 or 6 basics smattered across the rest, and they've just weaved this thing together. And it's because with the mana fixing that you put into your cube, allowed them to accomplish that goal that they saw in the draft and were like, I'm going to create this thing, this very specific deck, and I need mana fixing to do it. And as long as you have that provided for them, you're going to allow your drafters to create a lot of awesome cube moments. And for that is the primary reason I think that lands are just critical to include, not only in large quantities, but with an abundance and care in selecting what lands you are putting in your cube.
Definitely. And you can use particular types of lands. Some lands are better for aggressive decks, some for controlling decks. Some lands are better for combo decks, or there's various considerations for all of those. But the big thing for me is I like a high volume of lands. Mm-hmm. And that facilitates those moments of discovery, or just generally the more castable spells you have access to in your pool, the less samey things feel from draft to draft.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I don't want to bring up pips again because we bring it up every show, and I feel like 20 minutes in is too early. But having a robust land base is going to let you have to worry about that less, and that doesn't mean like you don't want your mono blue deck to be able to. I don't say we don't want to, but we're not talking about your mono blue deck splashing Knight of the White Orchid, but something that allows them to cast spells roughly on time with the appropriate amount of punishment. Because obviously some cubes and want there to be some punishment in doing so, but again, that's going to depend on the type of land cycles that you are selecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like it, just like you said, some spells are just difficult to cast, and if you go way overboard, it's tough to do it at a larger cube size. But if you play a cube where you're drafting every card and there's just an outrageous volume of lands, then the casting costs stop being problematic. But the combination of however many lands you have and just however heavy on pips cards are, there's enough that's punishing there that I don't like going lean on lands anyway.
Yes, for sure. So let's set aside the mana fixing lands for now. How important do you feel are the non-mana fixing lands? So cards like the creature lands, Mutavault, Mishra's Factory, cards that are interacting with your other opponent's lands, Wasteland, Strip Mine. Basically, either cards that are the kind of the one color or no colored land specific or mana specific cards, or maybe more than two colors, often like 5 color specific cards.
I find
how do you feel about those?
I find that those lands are very important for monocolor and or aggressive decks, because on average, in general, you go into 2 colors because the spell quantity or quality has dried up in your primary color, or just generally you see something better going on in a second or third color, etc. So you move into extra colors so your spells can be more powerful, and you are passing on some of those opportunities, whether it's actively a decision you're making earlier in the draft or just something that's going to catch up with you eventually in the draft, where it's just, okay, well, I'm only 1 color and there's really not a lot going on for me in this pack. And sometimes you have to really scrap to get a deck together. Other times you can have a really solid monocolor deck. But in order to allow the monocolor decks to perform as consistently as the gold decks, I think it's incredibly valuable to have some of those lands that function as spells in the mana base, both because it technically fudges the quantity of spells in their hand. If it's a 3-land hand, but one's a Mutavault, it's kind of like a 5-spell hand. But also it is a card that does not come from your colors allocation. Mutavault is showing up as a colorless card in the cube, and it's going to go into that monocolor aggro deck more often than not. So you help those decks exist and perform with these kinds of lands. And I think they're very important for that sort of thing.
That was you right at the end there. You made the exact point that when I was asking that question, as I was kind of thinking of is, I think a lot of those cards that are especially the colorless lands are really ultimately cards that are going to assist the monocolored or the more low to the ground decks from a mana perspective or a color requirement perspective. And they're not cards that take up slots for those archetypes. Wasteland and and Strip Mine, those are going to appear in white and red aggressive decks more often than they're going to appear in other decks. But they're not white or red cards because ultimately they can still be drafted and used by anyone. And they're the color of your deck ultimately does not matter. But it helps those decks out as well. I think at a greater degree, because generally the slower decks are the ones that are going to be taking advantage of the fixing lands where you don't have the ability or more the desire to do so if you're in one of the lower to the ground single color or specifically aggressive strategies.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that is also just another point where the multicolor decks just get to go deeper into the pack, drafting things that they want. Like, okay, well, here's a spell I want in one color. Here's a spell another color. Here's a gold spell. Here's a land. I'm looking for kind of all of these things in some combination, whereas a monocolor deck is just kind of paying attention to one color of spells, colorless options, and then utility lands, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. I think the juxtaposition of, an aggressive deck looking for a Mutavault, saying this is something I actively want to draft because it doesn't take up a spell slot in my deck and it does not hurt me, and a greedier deck, a 2 or 3 color deck, looking at Mutavault and saying I cannot afford to play this because it does not provide me one of my multiple colors of mana. I think there's a very nice push and pull, and including those lands in addition to the fixing lands is also very, very important because when you're when you're in a position as a drafter, those are kind of two of the things that are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Obviously, there's a lot in the middle, but I think it's important to make sure that you are satisfying the decks that still want to have access to things, working within their mana base, even if it's mostly basic lands, as opposed to the fixing, which is going to be the less aggressive decks on average.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. So, I don't know if I want to ask this question now or save it to the next segment. I'll ask it now. Do you think that having land cycles, full cycles, I don't mean just land cycles, but I mean like a cycle of 10 lands matters in cube design?
So there's the question you asked, does it matter? The short answer is yes. The question, is it necessary? The long answer is no. So it's a yes, it matters. Do you have to do it? No, but there are reasons that it is good to do it. And a big thing is that just most cube experience, and this is reinforced by all of the Magic Online cubes, mostly. There's been some minor deviations for Spotlight cubes at this point. All the Arena cubes just have complete cycles. And if it's an incomplete cycle, it's because only half of it's been printed. You'll have triomes, all 5 triomes are in. It's an incomplete cycle, but all of the ones that exist are present. Mm-hmm. And so if you see one in a pack, you get an idea that the other 4 or 9 are there. And I think it is useful to take advantage of asymmetric cycles when it comes to different color pairs caring about different things.
Yep.
You might have creature lands for the aggressive color pairs, horizon lands for the aggressive color pairs, and then like temples for the controlling, or if there's like a combo thing going on for those kind of color pairs. And those kind of asymmetric cycles, I think, are useful. I think the majority of your land column should be complete cycles.
Okay. I have a slightly different take, but it is a lot closer aligned to the kind of incomplete cycles, and based on what colors want to be doing. So, to me, it is important that there is an equal amount of each two color fixing land in the cube. So if I have 5 blue and white color fixing lands, I need to have 5 green red color fixing lands. That to me is something that is important, because it goes back to kind of the first thing that I was discussing, which is having access to this for your drafters allows the discovery in the draft process that I think is critical. Mm-hmm. And if you make that unequal, then that would hinder that. And obviously no one is suggesting that, but I don't think it is as important to have full cycles as it is to have a same number of total lands that produce those colors, those 2 colors of mana.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that really the disagreement between the 2 statements that we're putting out here is actually largely semantics, just based off of the land cycles that exist. Is some of the reason I'm saying that you should use complete cycles is because most cubes are starting with fetch dual shock, like that's just going to be a very significant chunk of your land column anyway. And deviating from those, for some reason, you just sub out one of those. It's really odd. Maybe you have a very good reason. Maybe you even are deviating more significantly, but there's something about your cube aesthetically where you can make it immediately obvious it's going to be the case, where maybe you're just the color imbalanced vintage cube. And it's, okay, well, all of the duels are blue duels. Maybe you're that extreme. It's pretty easy to understand that just being told that once. And just based off of the volume of blue cards that are probably in this cube, you're probably not looking for Temple Garden. So there's different ways to do it. I like trying to make it as clear from the jump as possible, and telling everybody every bit of nuance is not the way to make it clear. There should be stuff that you can infer pretty easily based off of broad context.
Yeah, I think that is a good. I think the kind of the main exclusively, like, their goal is to fix colors. Like, that is their first, second, and third thing. I agree on the basis of those. And going into like kind of, I'll give some specific examples of the other ones. So I believe in the last update of the Vintage Cube, and I could be wrong, Ryan probably knows this for sure, but I'm under the impression that there is the full cycle of 10 creature lands, the ones that are in World Wake and then Battle for Zendikar, respectively.
Yep.
And you have all 10. You have the good ones. You have Creeping Tar Pit. You have Raging Ravine. You have Celestial Colonnade. You have the bad ones. You have Needle Spires and Hissing Quagmire and Lava Claw Reaches. Right? So now, I don't think that anyone would assume that Hissing Quagmire is better than Nurturing Peatland. However, Nurturing Peatland, absent from this cube, presumably because the person that designed the Magic Online Vintage Cube was sticking to these 10 color cycles. They stuck to it hard. Mm-hmm. There's no deviation. If you see a Needle Spires, or rather, if you see a Celestial Colonnade, you can assume Needle Spires is in the cube, and you would be correct. Now, Needle Spires is generally not very good, and I would say it's certainly worse than Sunbaked Canyon, again, and it's probably worse than whatever the pathway is. I wouldn't dare to guess what the name of it was, but the red and white pathway. But because of that, you are stuck with things in these color combinations that might make less sense than they would if you broke down what each of these 2 color decks individually might look like. And I think that while this is creating more clarity for your drafters, I don't think it is doing them any favors when they get to the games.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And some of the issue, my current Grixis Tubert, it does use some asymmetric land cycles, even with just 3 colors going on, with 3 2-color pairs. And even when I kept it at 360, I ended up keeping everything symmetrical when I put it on Magic Online, just because I feel like if you see one card in a cycle, you expect the rest, and anything that deviates from that is kind of homeworky. But what I did for a while, and some of this is just because Fetchlands are very good and you get fewer of them with fewer colors, I just replaced Lava Claw Reaches with second Bloodstain Mire for a while. And that's something that I think is very positive for the cube draft and play experience. A little wonky on the paper, but I do agree that is just something of that nature. And it could even just be Red-Black Pathway, for example, just a land that's better than dumpy garbage Lava Claw Reaches.
Which is almost every other black-red land, to note.
Right. And some of it is, like, we've actually been in a few years of them doing enemy-colored sets without really much love for allied colors, where we went to Tarkir, and that was an enemy color, a lot of powerful 3-color cards, and then we went to Ikoria, and we have some okay 3-color cards, but the big takeaway being the triomes.
Yeah.
And ally colors have not gotten that love in quite a bit of time.
Yeah, it seems like, I think that was like the tipping point, like up until Ikoria, it seemed like everything was roughly even, and then the triomes firmly pushed it into the direction of the enemy color, because as we were talking about prior to the show, the Horizon lands.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say that's just 3-color stuff, but then also just Horizon lands and supplemental products only being the enemy 2-color pairs is just more things stacking up against the ally color stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I understand that, like, we are working against, a decade and a half of imbalance, like purposeful imbalance by Wizards. They were like, you can have Apocalypse as this set as a treat. But don't expect us to give you enemy colored stuff ever again. And I think that, like, when that set came out, that was the assumption of how that was going to work. But anyway, yeah. So it has moved towards enemy colors, but I think it is. Getting back to our larger point, to me, it is critically important that you have an equal number of things that are fixing mana on a per 2-color basis. It doesn't matter as much to me what they are once you get the things that do the purpose of fixing the mana the best. So if you are a cube that is able to play dual lands, then having duals, fetches, shocks of all of your colors, I think, is critically important. I don't think it would make much sense. As much as I dislike Selesnya and green and white as a 2-color pair, I wouldn't replace Savannah with Temple of Plenty just because I thought it was a crappy 2-color combination.
Yeah, in particular, if you have some of the most powerful cycles, I generally don't like even what you would argue it was a purposeful substitution. Like, if you have 9 shock lands and you sub 1 out, and I'm drafting that color pair, you were
tricking your drafters at that point.
I'm going to bring my shock land from home. I'm going to play it because I think you're being stupid.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Now, I don't think that happens very often, but a lot of people are listening that are building their cubes for the first time, and those are kind of the reasons that you see those in every single cube. Mm-hmm. Because there is, not only are they the most effective of what they do, but because of their history and their impact in cube design since their existence, that is going to be expected. Once someone sees one, they're going to want to see the rest, or think that they should expect to see the rest, which, and as we said, Ryan and I both agree.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's topic number 1, man. We're just like scratching the surface here. Mm-hmm. Ryan, do you have for anything that we've talked about for this little section? You have anything else before we move on?
I think that we're already planning the broader cycle conversation, which is where my mind goes next.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, let's get into the specifics of the cycles. We're going to take another quick break and be back in just a moment to talk about more lands. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to starcitygames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it all in a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygame.com/sell. Selling has never been easier. All right. We talked about cycles. I would like to get in to discussing the cycles.
Let's do it.
Because here's what we can agree on. Well, actually, you know what? I think this actually might require some slightly more discussion than we are maybe willing to give it credit for. But let's talk about the big three when it comes to land cycles, which is dual lands, fetch lands, and shock lands. The reason I want to talk about this is because one of those is extremely expensive. Another one of those is, until Modern Horizons 2 as a whole, was actually also reasonably expensive, not quite as expensive as the first one. And then the last cycle, which are the first one obviously is the dual lands, the second are the fetch lands, and the third of the shock lands are the cheapest, are still on average the third most expensive cycle of lands that you could purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are making a cube, how important is it if you are trying to have mana, but you are maybe constrained by some sort of budget? How important is it to have each of those things in your cube?
It really depends on your goals for gameplay. An example of this, the original Tubert, very mid-range gameplay. It has shock lands, does not have fetch lands or duels. And unless you're trying to incentivize the most powerful things of all time, I think that really that your cube just goes down the line. Every color, colorless cards, lands. The power level should be even across them. So if you want the most powerful stuff in your cube, you should have the most powerful lands, which means fetch lands and dual lands, and it probably means shock lands just because you got to get there on volume. And if you're going for a lower power level, totally excusable to go with the less powerful land cycles. Matter of fact, original duels, they tend to only show up in vintage or legacy cubes alongside cards like Grim Monolith and Gaia's Cradle, right? I think that the original dual lands are a luxury that if you got them, great. In terms of broad cube design, I, at this point, have worked on more cubes that don't play them than do.
Yeah. Yeah, your point, you actually made the point I was ultimately going to get to. I think of the three, from a reasonable, what is their function and how important are they? I think the shock lands, if you're not having a rarity restricted cube, those are the ones that I would aim for as a primary focus.
Yes.
That is going to accomplish the specific goal of fixing your mana without having to snap your wallet in half to do so.
Outside of rarity restricted cubes, I think that shock lands are actually the most useful and best land cycle for cube of all time. And if you were playing before they were printed, I was playing when Ravnica came out, and I remember it was a big deal. They previewed Temple Garden as the first card from Ravnica, and it was a really huge reveal. At the same time, it's clearly a watered down version of Savannah, but the more time that passes, the more incredible it is how right they got these lands. Because they are, in essence, a worse something else, but they're just such a better design and gameplay experience broadly.
Yeah, I agree. See, this is where I thought we were going to have our first disagree moment, because I have ranked like a dozen land cycles, and I have Shocklands as my number one most important lands for Cube, because I was going to say all the same things.
Nice. Yeah, and like they've been through a few different standards now, and they're
three standards.
They're just really welcome. 2-color decks, 3-color decks, 4-color decks. You know, when it gets to 4-color, that's typically because of some other land cycle that's been legal alongside them, and the other land cycle has been the culprit. They've been the problem. The Shocklands have just been very positive.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. Yeah, I thought you were going to go Fetchlands here as the most important, but that is the difference between from a design perspective and a draft perspective.
Mm-hmm. So. I do think that Fetchlands, more than original duels, do facilitate that high power level thing. I think if you are going to build a legacy style cube, you can get away with not having original duels as long as you have shocks and fetches, and the fetches giving you cards in graveyard, a shuffle effect for various different things like brainstorm, what have you. The fetch lands contribute a lot in terms of gameplay beyond your mana development, whereas the dual lands are very good, but they contribute less there. So even if you're at highest power level, which generally I think that the tempo tuber really is facilitating very powerful decks, is very much a legacy power level gameplay style cube. It doesn't have original dual lands. And some of that is the fetch lands contributing a lot of meaningful game pieces. And then Shocklands also being important for facilitating the Death Shadow archetype. But I don't think you need the original duels just on power level or utility. I would put them below the fetch lands as well.
Yep. I have them ranked Shocklands, Fetchlands, ABU duels.
Nice.
So we are in agreement, unfortunately. I thought we were going to be disagreeing. But here we are. This is where I like to remind everyone, as this has been, I've said this multiple times, comparing Shocklands and original dual lands is akin to comparing Lightning Bolt and Shock. Shock as a card is much worse than Lightning Bolt. Shock as a card has been a 4-of staple in every standard format it's ever been.
Yep.
So there's some context. Just because something is incredibly powerful doesn't mean the next best thing, which is a lot worse, is not still very, very good. And that's where we are with shocks and duels. And when you combine everything, I think Shocklands just take the cake. So if you're making a cube, those are the ones unless you're not able to play them because they are rares, I believe those are the ones that you should have.
Yeah.
Singular. Okay. All right. So now there's a bunch of other land cycles. So this is going to be kind of a nebulous thing because obviously there's going to be asterisks abound for all of these. But tell me, I'll let you tell me, you either do you want to tell me land cycles that you have ranked highly, or would you like me to tell you land cycles I have ranked highly?
So I want to do one then the other, because I know that you've been poring over a list of cycles. You probably have a firmer rank going down. I have what I believe is the 4th best / most important. And then the rest, I think, generally serve specific purposes.
Okay.
And are more interchangeable there. But the 4th land cycle for me, the one that I'm always reaching for, and a big part of this is because I think aggressive decks are important for the ecosystem, is fast lands. Blackleaf Cliffs, Spiral Bluff Canal, those ones I play a lot. I think that those are really important, really powerful lands. They also do a great job of keeping things to 2, maybe 3 colors. There's a steep drop off for fast lands if you're trying to play 4 colors, and the 4-color decks tend to be ignoring your design anyway and just trying to play only powerful cards, ignoring synergies. Yeah. And I like the 2 and 3-color decks better. So fast lands for me are the 4th best cycle.
Okay, I have fast lands as my 5th cycle.
Okay.
So I have one that is above them.
Do you have the creature lands above them?
No, I don't.
Okay.
The creature lands are...
I do have the creature lands firmly below them.
Yeah, I do too.
I want to see if I can guess your cycle then. Is it the Buddy Dragon Skull Summit at all?
That is correct.
Okay. Those are good lands. I play them a bit less.
Yes. So the reason that I have these ranked highly, and this is again, this is where kind of asterisks come in. I agree that the fast lands that Ryan are talking about, that's Razor Verge Thicket and Concealed Courtyard and Inspiring Vantage, those lands from Scars of Mirrodin and Kaladesh, are the ones Ryan's talking about. So the buddy lands, which are Dragon Skull Summit, Sunpetal Grove, Clifftop Retreat, Woodland Cemetery, the lands that allow them to come into play if you control one of the two basic land types. So Woodland Cemetery will enter the battlefield untapped if you have a swamp or a forest. It doesn't have to be basic, just a swamp or a forest. So the reason that I have these ranked higher is because if you are just making a more general cube and you are trying to facilitate just mana fixing, I think that these serve the purpose of more cubes more frequently than any other land cycle. They are the least detrimental to include from a design perspective because they're very simple. They don't have basic land types. They care about you playing things with basic land types, which in a lot of senses is also basic lands because there's obviously not many other cycles that have basic land types outside of the ones we had mentioned prior. Shocklands, dual lands. And those are the lands that you don't have to deviate away from on a color specific angle. And I don't think you have to much with the fast lands, but I think that the buddy lands, which is what I call them, are slightly more accepting for like a whole swath of cubes.
I think that's agreeable. I definitely think based off of our differences on favorite cube size, I think that the buddy lands are incredible for a 540 card cube.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
I think that the fast lands are better in a smaller cube.
Yeah,
I agree.
That this all just makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that the fast lands I have is my fifth cycle.
Sure.
Just because I think that from a power level perspective, they meet the power level that Ryan is discussing, but for all the reasons he just said, that's where I have them ranked 4 and 5, as opposed to how Ryan has them. So, Okay, so what comes after Fastlands for you, objectively?
Yeah, so I mean, this is where things largely break down. I would say if I'm picking a land and a land cycle that I tend to include in cubes would be the creature duels. Outside of a couple of them being kind of garbage, which is the big downside of the cycle, having the 2-color decks have access to a spell in the mana base, I think is pretty valuable. And I also prefer to have cubes that facilitate 2 and 3 color decks, sometimes 4, and land that enters tapped and produces 2 colors kind of fits that paradigm pretty well.
Yes. So I have those. So I have Buddy Lands, Fast Lands. Fast Lands is 5, and I have Creature Lands as 7. And the ones that I have above this is a little bit of a cheat because it's not a 10-card cycle, it's a 5-card cycle, and that's the Triomes. For the exact reason you said, if you're trying to facilitate these come into play tapped 100% of the time lands, even though they don't have the utility of being a spell in your mana base, they obviously do have cycling, which certainly comes up. I think those are more cubable than all of the creature lands as a whole. Now, if I could cut them into 2 sections of creature lands, I would take the top 5 creature lands over the Triomes, but I would take the Triomes over the bottom 5 creature lands, and it wouldn't be close.
Triomes also are significant if you are trying to facilitate the buddy lands. That much is clear. Also, Triomes do a thing that I try to disincentivize, but if you want to incentivize it, they make perfect sense. Triomes, they have this thing where you can play them in 2-color decks. If you read them at a surface level, they're 4 3-color decks, but they're actually 4 and 5-color deck lands. And if you want a Golos Tireless Pilgrim or an Omnath Loke of Creation, Triomes, those are the lands for you.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I think that is I think that's kind of the just the great thing about them is that one, prior to their existence, I would not have thought that they would have been printed because I thought that the bicycle lands, I guess the 2-color cycling lands from Amonkhet, I thought that those were like pretty reasonable
those
lands.
are
I thought we were going to
playable.
finish that cycle.
I thought they'd finish that cycle. Also, tri-lands are just totally playable.
Yep,
Like,
they sure are.
I
made the
am
list.
on a small list of people who have registered Frontier Bivouac in Pioneer tournaments. Like, that was just a card you could play.
Yeah. They come blow them out of the water. But the reason that I think that it does fit into the 2-color paradigm is if I am wanting to have like a 2-color deck, I will just happily draft these because that cycling just comes up like very frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if you have a fetch land that only finds one of your colors. Like, they certainly get played in 2-color decks. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. They're targets when you're a drafter. They're targets for the 4 and 5 color decks, though. Absolutely, I will not dispute that. Like, if you know that Omnath or Golos is in your cube, you're chomping at the bit to get these triumphs.
Yep.
No question about that. Okay, so after that, I have in this order, and this is going to be the more that I have like played with these, the more I've actually appreciated them. Is Pathways, then Bounce Lands, then Temples, and then the Frontier Bivouac Savage Land cycle.
Okay. I would put Pain Lands ahead of
I just forgot
Tri-lands. Yeah. I would also put Pain Lands ahead of Bounce Lands.
Yep. I agree with both of those things.
Yeah. Picking up a set of Pathways is on my to-do list. I have a design that it will be the first one of my cubes that'll feature Pathways. I know that Liz Lynn built a version of the original Tuber that played Pathways over either the Fastlands or Shocklands. I honestly think it might have been Shocklands, but I'm not sure. But anyway, the idea was that they are better for keeping people to 2 or 3 colors, and I think they do a great job of that while also entering the battlefield on tap. So they're a solid play experience outside of the fact that digitally I never have any idea what the fuck they are.
Also, I don't know the name of a single one.
No, not a clue. Earlier, if you just said a name,
River Glide is one of them.
Yeah, I was playing Snarl Bluff Pathway. I would just have to say, yeah, that's a land, and I knew what it was. I'm not. I'm up on this.
Yeah, they are. It's like, look, there's 20 names. That is too many. 10. Sometimes with a gun to my head, I don't know if I could in under like 10 seconds say all 10 of the like ABU dual lands. So there's I'm not even going to put like, I'm not even going to set aside like space in my brain to remember these pathways.
I'm pretty sure the front side of the blue-red one is called River Glide Pathway.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure it's the blue side.
It's River Glide and Lava Glide. That might be the only one that I know.
So,
and I'm also not 100% sure.
When you said that, it sounded right. But again, you could have said anything, and I would have to defer to you.
Yeah, those are the legitimately. That's the only one that I can think of that I'm pretty sure on. Anyway, Painlands, I just forgot. I actually agree. I think that they are. I think I like Pathways more than the Painlands, but I think that they would go between Pathways and Bounce Lands.
Yeah, I think if you find yourself in a position where your cube skews aggressive and you have some heavy pip casting costs at the low points on your curve, then Painlands, just for letting you go 1 mana red card into 2 mana black card, would get the nod potentially. But even still, I think broadly the Pathways is going to be a better fit more often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I would like to state that the temples from Theros, the original Theros block, I hope at some point Now they're still in standard. They're about to not be in standard, but they're in standard right now. I hope that once we are far enough away from those being in standard, that whenever they come back, they can be reprinted as uncommons.
Yeah.
Because they would be the very best like uncommon land cycle, but they are the very worst rare one.
Yeah.
So
what you like, it's hard to disagree with that statement on either side.
Yeah. They're disappointing. I don't. It's one of those. It's like, well, I need to fix my mana, so I'll draft this when I'm a drafter, like, and I'm faced with that in front of me. But as a cube designer, it's like, can't I just come up with something better? Like, can't like anything better? Like, we have so many options. This is what I was talking about with like, like offsetting cycles, which kind of brings me to the next thing, which is the Horizon lands. I think the Horizon lands are very good, but there's only 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone thinks that they're very good, but there's only 6 of them, which is quite frustrating with how they kind of fit into the hierarchy when you are trying to have an equal number of fixing lands.
I have all 6 in the Tempo Tubert, and I was so sure that Modern Horizons 2 would give us the last 4. Let's see if I can name the other land. I'm pretty sure it's not that hard, actually. I think I have 3 fast lands and Creeping Tar Pit.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. The other lands so like, let's say you're looking at a lower rarity cube. The Thriving lands are excellent.
I love the Thriving lands, dude.
Yeah.
I just want to say real quick, Thriving lands versus Tri-lands. I think that the gameplay experience on Thriving lands is immeasurably better in terms of a drafter. There's this thing that happens when you draft with a Tri-land where you mentioned bounce lands. There's some other just 2 color cycles that you can support more or less, but just bounce lands just by their own merits are just much better 2 color lands. And the idea of putting Tri-lands in a cube like that is that they can function as a guild gate, just a 2 color tap land in a 2 color deck. Ideally, you can make all 3 colors, but really what happens is once you have a Tri-land, you're thinking, well, it's kind of wasteful not to play all these colors just because like any other land would be better than this. And then you end up with multiple Tri-lands. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'm just playing a 5 color deck now.
I love that. That's such a true statement. It's wasteful. I have access to this 3rd color. Like, shouldn't I just be trying to do something with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like Thriving lands show up and you get the on color one. You're like, sick. This is a guild gate. And you get an off color one and you're like, sick. This is Evolving Wilds.
Yeah.
And like, they just play so much better. And just like the way that at least they work in my mind, like the way that they feel to me just is so much more natural and so much more conducive to playing a 2 color or like a reasonable deck.
So I will agree that if all things are equal, that the play experience for the Thriving lands is better than the Tri-lands. The only downside is 1, there's 5 versus 10.
Yep.
And 2, once you get into having more, let's say you were like, I'm going to include 2 Thriving lands instead. Once you have more than one of them on the battlefield, the play experience is no longer better.
It does get messy. This is still messy because there's an extra element and you hate having anything on your lands. But
sure
I put a colored
Super
die on my Thriving lands is how I track that.
Yeah. The honorable mention here for me is the Vivid lands, but I'll never include them in any cube I ever create. Never one. It could literally be called the Vivid Cube, and I would not put the Vivid lands in. It would upset people, and I'd be like, well, they suck, so I hate counters on my lands. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I am grateful that Vivid lands are just completely irrelevant today. They are still in proliferate. They were at least in the first one of Proliferate Cube. I think
put more of them because you start with 2 and you want more than 2 on your lands.
Right. But you play that one digitally, so it's a little bit more forgivable.
That's fine. Yeah, digitally is fine. It's just that in paper, like I don't have a die that says 4 on my lands. I just don't want that. I don't want that. Anyway, Okay, a couple of other lands that I want to talk about, especially for like lower powered cubes. There's kind of 4 main cycles, and they all are providing something slightly different. You have the gates, which obviously have the gate subtype. In case you're doing gate or gate adjacent stuff. Maybe you stop playing Magic right after Ravnica Allegiance came out, and you were really excited about the gate deck. That's cool. They're also just completely fine lands coming to play tapped. The bridges from Modern Horizons 2, which are indestructible artifact lands. I actually have a small amount of those in my 540 card cube because I am supporting an artifact thing.
Nice.
And that's like my 6th land.
Yeah, to go with like
Bridge.
Goblin Welder.
Exactly. Yeah. So the bridges, the snowlands, which come into play tapped because they have the 2 different
Basic land types.
Exactly. And then of course the gain 1 life lands. All of these provide 2 colors of lands come into play tapped. The gain 1 life lands like Dismal Backwater and other ones. I know Dismal Backwater. I know that one.
Swiftwater Cliffs is the blue-red one.
There it is. Yep. Okay. We got 2.
Scoured
Barrens. That's it. That's
yeah,
black
white.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, and there's 7 more presumably. So
Blossoming Sands. That's green, white.
Yeah, white, green. Okay. Oh, I don't. Let's see.
There's also an allied only cycle. It's the same thing that came out in Zendikar.
Yeah, the refuges.
Yeah.
Sinjiri Refuge is the white blue.
So you got some options.
Kazandu Refuge. I know all of those for whatever reason.
For the record, on the gain 1 life lands, they actually were pretty significant parts of their respective limited environments. And if you cultivate a pauper cube, keep in mind, if you choose the gain 1 life lands over any other tap land, you do actually put your aggressive decks at more of a disadvantage than you might think at a glance.
Yes. Big time. Yeah. It is actually, so let's say if you are a pauper cube owner, aggressive decks can be tough because everything is, I don't know if on average there is a grindier style of cube than a pauper cube.
Right.
Like everything is about 2-for-1s and divinations.
Mm-hmm.
And once you play 2 gain 1 lands, you are negating one of your opponent's cards somewhere down the line. If you're playing it against an aggressive deck.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is they are definitely notable. I absolutely agree with that. They're very good, but that is something that you have to keep in mind when you're going down that way.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any other even like cycles of lands that we didn't touch on that we are important for cube in any way? What are we missing?
It would have been smart for me to have any kind of visual aid in front of me before we started going over.
I like doing it live.
Yeah.
Let's just do it live. Yeah.
Actually, so the good filter lands are somewhat significant. The Shadowmoor Eventide filter lands, not the eggs that we we were forced to make mention of.
Not Darkwater Catacombs and its ilk. Yeah.
Graven Cairns, originally from Future Sight, and then later the finished cycle. Those lands are pretty nice because they enter untapped and they can help if you have some tougher to cast stuff. The card that comes to mind is Cryptic Command, but that's just like a vintage cube caliber card. But in general, if you have some more expensive stuff with some tougher casting costs, those lands can be pretty significant for those kinds of cubes. Yeah,
I think those were honestly a decade ago, those were cube staples.
Yep.
Before we had, they were, on the heels of, they came out Shadowmoor Eventide.
Yep.
Yeah, we didn't have almost all of the land cycles that we are talking about right now. We didn't actually, the Buddy Lands, when those came out, the Buddy Lands didn't even exist yet.
Yeah.
Because the first 5 of those came out the next year when M10 came out. So yeah, those have certainly, when I built my first cube, those were in the cube and they were quite good because it's what you had. There was a huge drop off after Shocklands, Fetchlands, Dual Lands, and you're just like, all right, this is what I have to fix my mana. So,
speaking of huge drop off, the other cycle we didn't discuss was the snarls.
I think we have discussed them enough on the show. They are barely playable in standard, and they're even worse in cube. Even though you have things that have basic land types, that just means you have better cards in your cube to reveal to them. All that means. They were
in the Pioneer cube that was on Magic Online a few months back, and I played the blue-green one because Simic Guildgate was very good because blue-green were the best two colors.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it would have literally been just anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would play Simic Guildgate. I would play, if there was a blue-green of those Kamigawa lands, I think they're originally from like Alliances or Homelands or something. The one that like get a depletion counter and then don't untap if you made a colored mana with them. Like, yeah. I might play that in my blue-green deck. That's low. That's where you're at with Snarls.
Yeah, they're from Tempest originally.
Yep.
Yeah. When you tap them, you can't untap them next turn. Yeah, those are like the Snarls they're the worst lands of any lands we've talked about today.
Yeah, and if you have a friend that thinks that they're good, you can punish them by taking whatever color pair that they like and replacing good lands with those in your cube.
Yeah. When I was talking about like temples, I was talking about like Temple of Plenty earlier. Temple of Plenty is embarrassingly better than whatever the green white. It's not a Snarl because it's from the Shadows of Innistrad. Whatever the name of that land is. I do not know what it is.
Is it Fortified Village?
I think you're right.
Yeah, so those lands were standard legal when I started doing commentary for SCG, and I have very little idea what they're called, which tells you how playable they are.
Yes, I think I know. So Port Town is the white blue.
Yeah.
Foreboding Ruins is the black red.
Ooh, we saw a lot of the blue-black one in Pioneer for a while. We like to make fun of Choked Estuary.
Choked Estuary, yes. Yeah, and then Fortified Village is white-green. Red, green.
Game Trail.
There you go. All right. That's 5. And then Snarls. And I'll remember, I do want to say, as we talk, this is way back to episode 1 of the 540. If you have those, I would say to, if you want to spice it up a little bit, replace whatever the last word on all of those is with Snarl.
Cosign.
Or the first word, actually. Yeah. Either one will do.
Maybe both words.
Yeah. Choked Snarl, that works well. Fortified Snarl or Snarl Village.
Ooh, big fan of Snarl Village.
Yeah, they could go either way. Foreboding Snarl, that's not bad.
Game Snarl.
Yeah. So just replace one of those with Snarl. A Sharpie will do. You probably have another quarter to spare in case you need to replace it. Anyway, okay, so I think that is it for land cycles. Is there anything we're missing, Ryan, on the land cycles here?
Well, I closed my tab where I was trying to see if we missed any. So if we did, it's up to the viewers to berate us at this point.
Yes, let us know what we missed. Undoubtedly, we have missed something.
We didn't talk about Wizard School.
We didn't and we won't. Homelands is off the table. So, just let us know if there is anything that we have missed for fixing lands. This is for fixing, like cycles of fixing lands.
Oh, there's a cycle with types that's like fine. But there's only allied ones, the ones from Battle for Zendikar. Yeah. I think Battlelands was the SCG brand for them.
Yeah, those just need to have the other 5, and then I think we can come back and talk about them.
Yeah. They also just don't mix with Horizon lands or triomes very well. So
yeah,
some
they
problems.
actually don't mix with any of the other lands we've had on this part of the podcast.
That's a
which
big
is kind of
problem.
the point.
Yeah, I do have the blue-black one in the Grixis Tubert because it's good with High Tide and Bubbling Muck. So count them.
Ooh, spicy. Yeah, I don't dislike those, but they're just a disqualifier because there's only 5 of them.
Yeah,
They're not good enough to overcome that.
they're actually kind of weird to have in Cube unless you're very light on fixing and really hate the idea of somebody playing 3 colors.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. That definitely has covered the only other meaningful one. Surely there's nothing we've forgotten.
Yeah,
I'll go on record to say we've absolutely not forgotten anything else. But in the event that we did, let us know. Okay. We're going to take our last ad break and come back in just one moment.
What's up, gamers? Taking a break from the pod here to talk to you about Star City Games Premium. Now, I know many of you are already premium members. That's awesome. You're awesome. Thank you for that. If you are not already enrolled in SCG Premium, we need to talk. You are leaving a value on the table for $7.99 a month. You get access to 5% off of Magic Sealed product, 10% off of all Magic singles, 15% off of supplies. Now, I know that I'm talking to a lot of Cube owners here. I know that you're going to buy more sleeves. You know you are going to save this money right back on sleeves alone. So that's reason enough for you to enroll. But I am not done yet, not by a long shot. You also get tons of exclusive content from a fantastic stable of writers. We're talking about Jerry Thompson, Paulo Vitor Rosa, Patrick Sullivan, Autumn Burchett, Brad Nelson, Sheldon Memory, Ross Merriam, Todd Anderson, Shaheen Sarani, Michael Majors, Ryan Sachs, Ari Lax, Dominic Harvey, Cedric Phillips. The list goes on and on. My stuff, you can get that every week for free. You're welcome. But now I am asking a favor. Go ahead, get enrolled for SCG Premium. Go to starcitygames.com/join-premium. Sign up today. And let's get back to the podcast.
Okay, so to close out our design lands episode, I want to talk about numbers of lands, because a question that I get very frequently is how many lands should I have in blah 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 cube.
Mm-hmm.
And this is obviously kind of like you alluded to in the top of the show. That is a more complicated question than I think the people that are asking it generally kind of realize what they're asking. I think I will just say flat out, and I'm going to try to simplify this, even though it is not a simplifiable thing. So I'm going to contradict myself right now. I think a very good starting point for any cube that you are trying to encourage to have mana fixing available, meaning that you are having the ability for someone to draft a 2 or 3 color deck. I believe 10% of your cube should be mana fixing lands. So to put this in perspective, if you have a 540 card cube, if you have a cycle of 5 and then triomes, we'll just say cycle of 5 and then triomes, that's going to be 55 mana fixing lands, and that's going to be just a hair over 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that number, that 10% number, is to me a really, really good starting point. It doesn't have to be your finishing point, but if you're like, I want to allow people to draft 2 and 3 color decks, I think that is a very good place to start.
Yeah, it's a good baseline. I have worked with more 360 card cubes personally. These days, a lot more 180 card cubes. When it comes to 360 card cubes, I typically say 30 lands, assuming Fetch Tool Shock is the minimum. You have to start there. Definitely can't go lower. And I tend to like encouraging 3 color decks, and I usually end up with about 50 lands that are just mana fixing. Usually 51 because I like Prismatic Vista a lot.
Big fan of Prismatic Vista.
I own a lot of Prismatic Vistas these days. And then when it comes to the 180 card cubes, the original Tubert had 31 because it has a Prismatic Vista as well, but 30 mana fixing lands is actually 20% of that cube. And the equation's a lot different because there's a lot of agency in how you construct your deck, but there's not a ton of range in archetypes that you would expect to see in a 540 card cube, where there's a lot more stuff happening with every color. So
yes,
just making sure players can cast their spells because their spells fit into a small range of macro archetypes is more important there. So the volume is just higher, just because making it so people can cast their spells and play their games is a really important goal, where in a 540 card cube, you're also juggling a diversity of play experience, a diversity of archetypes. So I end up increasing that number for that reason.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, it is kind of what you're saying. If for a 360 card cube, if you're starting with the big three, and then you're saying I like to add a fourth, well, that's a hair over that number. That's like 12% of that cube. So I mean, my personal cube is around for my 540 card cube is around 14% of mana fixing lands, because I do like to be higher than average, but I think that is I think that is a good baseline.
Yep.
For people to start with. And it definitely does depend on the cube, because we're primarily talking about more traditional cubes, but there are cubes that you might not have access to all of, you might not have access to Fetchlands and Alpha Beta dual lands. Alpha Beta Unlimited provides dual lands. So then the shock lands are kind of your top tier of your lands. And then when you get to your fourth or fifth cycle, there's a big difference between those. So that's kind of where you have to ask yourself, how does my cube play out? What I would recommend is picking one just to start and trying it, because the answer to this question is going to be so contextual based on the makeup of the actual spells in your cube beyond the lands. I just want to make sure that people have access to figure stuff out in a draft, and that's kind of where this number comes from.
The other big thing, specifically Fetchlands, are a really difficult cycle to replace. If you're starting with a percentage baseline, you want X%, and among those, you're factoring in Fetchlands. When you say, okay, well, budget-wise, I'm priced out of Fetchlands. The way that they synergize with duals and shocks, Fetchlands actually are worth more than other dual lands in your cube, because you can find Verdant Catacombs, and it's a red-green land for your Gruul deck, assuming that you found Stomping Ground. And that matters. Enough to at least include a half cycle, maybe something like Triomes, or another full cycle if you have to replace that with one cycle. You probably want to look at replacing it with 2 cycles. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, because they're just, the utility there is beyond just the fixing.
Yeah,
I mean, just straight away. Which we've talked about, but I think that this more goes into the drafting, but you do have to supplement, because you're having less agency over manipulating your deck when you're just, essentially just drawing a card and hoping that it is a land that fixes your mana and playing it, rather than being able to seek it out. Because even I'll go as deep as saying the snow land cycle that enters the battlefield tapped at snow. They have basic land cycles. Having those with Fetchlands is that combination is better than having pathways and pain lands in your cube as opposed to that combination of those two. That's how much better Fetchlands are, as far as from a utility of actually providing you with robust mana fixing, in addition to doing all of the other gameplay things they do.
Definitely.
Shuffling and providing graveyard assistance and such.
Yeah, I won't go into the nitty gritty of actually quantifying what the cycle of fetch lands is worth when you have different land types, but I mean, I think you can say that it's less than 2, but it's so obviously more than 1 cycle.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Is there ever a, and this is again going to be very contextual, but is there ever a time when you want to make sure that you have a certain number of one color lands or not have too many of one color lands? So I'm talking Treetop Village, Sheldock Isle, get maybe the new Adventures in the Forgotten Realm creature lands.
I think that drafting utility lands, or some of this could be replaced with just drafting lands generally, but I think that drafting lands is so ingrained with the experience of cube draft. It's so much a part of it that either, even if you are a 5-color cube, making room for some utility lands is a fun thing so that even monocolor drafters get to do it. But especially if you're doing a color restricted cube, I've always included a good clip of utility lands in Grixis cube. And just either if it's something where you're able to draft a land for your aggressive deck, and so you have some spells in the land column, or it's just like Sheldock Isle is really good. I want to draft it. And it's kind of fun to draft that land because now I have this extra spell in my deck. I think that they are just good to have around. And you want to keep up with color balance on them, specifically for something like Sheldock Isle that should count as a blue spell, or you should try to complete a cycle. But just having those utility lands, I think, is a very fun and kind of essential part of cube draft, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the good ones are good, and they're because they're not providing the fixing, which is primarily what we've been talking about. They are doing a lot more, but still are lands in the context of what it says on the card.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I that's how I feel too. Like a lot of those are just like in when I think of a cube, those are part of the things that I think of.
And that's just like a big departure between cube drafts and traditional booster draft decks. And that's one of the reasons that I still do regular booster drafts sometimes, but in some ways, cube has ruined regular booster draft for me. And it's like really sad when I go to build a deck and I'm like, okay, 9 of this basic, 8 of that one. Like, I hate that. That's not fun. That's not powerful.
It's not. It's neither. It's necessary, is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I always try to, whenever I do those, anything that does not, and this is just from a categorization standpoint, because often people say, like, how do you categorize your lands? So I will count something as a land if it is either producing more than one color of mana in my land section. So when I'm counting all of these lands, more than one color of mana, including fetch lands, or producing 0 colors of mana. So Rishadan Port, Wasteland, Mutavault, etc. Or providing 5 colors of mana, something like, a Prismatic Vista or City of Brass, etc.
Mm-hmm.
If it is providing 1 color of mana or has an activation cost, and this is actually more specific, if it has an activation cost of a color of mana, then I consider it a part of that color. So when I make my cube, I'm going to put Treetop Village as a green card rather than as a land card. I'm going to put Sheldock Isle as a blue card rather than as a land card.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just, ultimately, it doesn't matter. I think categorization for cubes is like pretty overblown, but that's something that people ask about frequently.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my personal philosophy.
I agree that it's overblown, but you are absolutely right. It's asked about constantly. I think it just deserves one of those alignment chart memes. Because, like,
I actually agree. Yeah.
It's this thing where if Tolarian Academy is in a cube, like, it's usually, this one's like a little cheaty because the cube is often going to be color skewed in favor of blue anyway. So whatever, like, make it imbalanced. Who cares? But like I've been looking at different styles of cubes that I'm trying to get a utility land for each color. And it usually starts with, okay, I have this land that I really want for this deck. I would like to have a cycle of some sort, because I think that's cool. I got thinking about this because I have a cube that I'm working on that I wanted to have Hand-Weird Garrison and Hand-Weird Battlements. And so I'm thinking, okay, here's your red utility land. What can I do with the other stuff? And so like, there's some obvious stuff. You know, Castle Ardenvale is a great white utility land. If the games go long, just cranking out the human tokens. That's powerful. But I've even considered, this would be the chaotic evil square on the alignment chart, but like Agadeem's Awakening is a utility land. Like you can go as deep or shallow as you want and how you want to categorize that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's actually a very good example of like what counts, what doesn't. I don't know. It's kind of just, where does it feel? Where does it feel right in your cube?
Yeah, and you can say like the only decks that are going to play Mishra's Factory and Mutavault are red and white decks. So I guess they're Boros lands.
Yeah, and that feels weird to look at, but it's probably contextually true. So then, what does that mean for you? If how you want to categorize your cube? And again, it largely doesn't matter. I feel like gotten more experience as a cube designer. I move farther and farther away from making sure things fit into whatever role, as far as from a numbers perspective that I've wanted them to. I don't care about colors having the same number of cards. I don't care about 2 color combinations matching up. The only thing that I've stuck to is I want to have, if I have 5 blue-white fixing lands, I'm going to have 5 black-green fixing lands. I'm going to have 5 red-blue fixing lands. Other than that, I don't care as much about categorization. That is more for people that care about that. It's something I've had to unteach myself as I've kind of grown as a cube designer. So hopefully this episode, as we've talked about some of this stuff, people can, reconfigure their perspective when they look at their own cube.
Yeah. And especially if you're playing a 540 card cube, like your experience is not going to be made or broken by the balance being 1% off. Like you're just not going to feel that. That's a pea under a stack of mattresses.
Yeah. I don't even think you would notice that in a 360 card cube.
No, you have to be really. I like. There's somebody that would. Like they'd be complaining about it and then ask you the question where they like inadvertently sniff it out.
Cards in this cube.
Yeah, like my white deck sucks. What's going on? But like, it's not. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I had to that was something that I was happy that I was like able to learn on my own. Like one day I was just like, it actually occurred because back several years ago, black was just like as a color in my cube was having this identity crisis, because I was like, do I want to make black aggro work, when I thought that was like something you could do. And I was trying to do that, and I'm like, well, what if I just have like 2 less black cards? I'm not trying to figure out like what cards are going to fit into here. And I was like, oh, I guess this is fine. No one cared, and we kept playing cube, and it wasn't a big deal ever. So yeah, but lands are great. I like to add a lot of them. I like to draft them, but we'll get to that next week. So before we go for today, Ryan, is there anything else from a cube design perspective that you want to talk about relating to lands?
I just think that the big takeaway is that the lands in your cube work for you. The question, how many lands do I need, is a bad question in literal terms, because the question you should be asking is how many lands do you want? And which lands serve the purposes you desire? Because the core rule engine of Magic requires them. So you can think about it in terms of need, but really you want to think, okay, well, how many colors do I want people to play? What do I want this color pair to do? And adjust your mana base thusly.
Could have said it better myself. You can subscribe to the 540 everywhere you can find podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, your local podcast app, wherever you're listening to this right now. Leave us a review wherever you can, either a star or a short message. We always appreciate that. Helps the algorithm, which is a hungry beast, as we always like to say. And of course, you can find all of my stuff over on Star City Games for Commander Versus. My other podcast is Think Twice. You can search Think Twice MTG wherever you're listening to this one right now, or those aforementioned spaces. And you can follow me on Twitter at jparnell1. Ryan, what about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, and my articles weekly on StarCityGames.com. This week, there is a new Spotlight Cube on Magic Online. I don't know what it is at the time of recording. By the time you listen to it, you should know what it is, and maybe you've already read my article on it. And then there's actually going to be 2 more weeks of Spotlight Cubes. I think the week after this one is going to be returning Spotlight Cube, yet unannounced, and then another new one. And then we're back to Legacy Cube. So I'm going to be doing a lot of writing about the online Cube offerings in the coming weeks. And then when those aren't happening, I write about all kinds of stuff pertaining to Cube. So check those out weekly on StarCityGames.com, and you can find those updates on my Twitter at Ryan Overdrive.
I love it. We're not done with lands, only the 50% mark. So thank you all for listening, and we will catch you back here next week.